Welcome back, podcast fans. I'm your host, Annette Hines, and this is Parenting Impossible, the Special Needs Survival Podcast. I am so excited to introduce you today to Jessica Fein, who is another rare mom and somebody who I have wanted to interview for a long time. Don't know why we haven't done this yet, but I've been following along, and I really have so much respect for everything that you've been doing and how you show up in our community. So welcome, Jessica. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. And likewise, I've been following you for so long, and it's kind of crazy that this is the first time we're actually meeting.
I know, it is actually. But that just goes to show how busy we can be in this
That's
world.
right. That's right.
So I always like to have people introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about how you ended up in this disability world that we live in.
Yes, thank you. Well, I am the mother of three children, and my middle daughter, Dahlia, had an ultra rare degenerative disease, a kind of mitochondrial disease called MERRF syndrome, myoclonic epilepsy, ragged red fibers. And that is how I got here. So Dahlia was diagnosed at age 5. And at the time, like so many people, we had no clue what it meant to be told our daughter had a rare disease, to
Yes,
be told she had mitochondrial disease.
been there.
Yeah. We're like, might have what?
Yeah,
We knew nothing. And I had been pushing for a couple of years to try to get a diagnosis because I
right.
had suspicion, right?
Yeah.
I had a very short diagnostic odyssey, and I know so many people who have lengthy diagnostic odysseys. But I guess I always thought if we had a diagnosis, then we'd have a protocol and a cure.
Right.
Well, that wasn't how it turned out. So, we spent 4 years watching Dahlia's symptoms slowly start to get more intense. So she started with hearing loss, and that became more severe. She had balance issues, and within a few years of the diagnosis, she was in a wheelchair.
Mhm.
But look, everything's relative, right? So when I look back now at those first 4 years, age 5 to 9, uh, it was relatively mainstream. She was still in regular school, and we were doing things that families do, and we were going on trips, and we were living a quote unquote, like in bold quotes, because I don't like this word, normal life.
Right. Well, I
And
think you can say it didn't impact your life
that's a
as
much better
much.
way to say it.
Yeah.
Much better way to say it. Yeah. And then when Dahlia was 9, we were actually on a family trip in Florida. We live outside of Boston, and Dahlia caught a cold. And as so
Mhm.
many people who are listening probably know,
Yeah.
there's no such thing as just like a simple cold when you have a mitochondrial disease, for sure, when you have, a rare disease.
Yeah.
And so there we were in Florida, and a cold quickly became pneumonia, quickly became Dahlia was intubated in a hospital in Florida.
Mhm.
And by the time we were able to get a medical jet back to Boston, which was a week of intense negotiation, advocacy, whatever you want to call it, we were admitted to the Mass General Hospital, where we stayed in the intensive care unit for 3 months. And at the end of those 3 months, Dahlia had lost a lot of functionality. She needed a tracheotomy, and that meant once she had the trach, she lost her ability to talk
Mhm.
and to eat orally, and she could no longer walk at all, and she was ventilator dependent. So that really thrust us into a totally different world in every way. And that was the next 8 years. Dahlia died 2 years ago, 1 week after her 17th birthday.
So my fans all know that my daughter also died at 17, and our journeys are very similar. Unfortunately, we had a couple of stages where the first few years were okay. Then we had a big dip. we recovered. We had some good years, and then the last couple of years were just rough.
The
Rough.
last 2 years for Dahlia too. I mean, 15 to 17, and it was COVID too, but that at that point, she lost all ability to move. So
Mhm.
she was totally frozen those last 2 years. She couldn't move at all. And that was definitely yet another stage in the whole thing. It was,
Yeah.
constantly adjusting to what came next.
And it's this just constant grieving process, right? Because there's so many losses. And I think it's, dying by 1,000 paper cuts.
Mm.
When you don't go through it, you just can't imagine what it's like to experience those losses on top of losses on top of losses. And also to not really be able to understand how your kid is feeling about all of that. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? How
And
much do they understand what they're losing? Oh my gosh.
yes, and the siblings. But, the other thing is, when you have the ultimate grief, the grief because of death, you then and often have the space to fully be in your grief.
Yeah.
What we're talking about with the 1,000 paper cuts, you are so in the moment. So while you're dealing with these waves of grief, you don't have time for that. I mean, in our case, the medical care for Dahlia was so intense. Plus we were,
Same.
yeah, and you're living life. I mean, my husband and I were working and we were living life. We wanted to give Dahlia and our other kids a childhood. We wanted to, do things and not just have our entire world be defined, even though in so many ways it was defined by the illness. We wanted to make sure that we were balancing that with
Yeah.
childhood.
Yeah. Oh, so difficult. And at times, I don't know if you felt this, but I just felt so numb, just
Mm.
trying to do all the tasks and check everything off every day and make sure the medical supplies arrived and the nurses were there and, dealing with the insurance and the Medicaid and certainly like what was going on at work and trying to make sure each child had attention. And yeah, it was really hard, like you said, to get the space to feel your feelings
Yeah.
and to deal with it.
I
And
kind of liken it to this idea of, just being so in the moment. It was almost like looking down at the very next thing that needed to happen, because it was also survival technique, right? If you look up and you take in the big picture,
yeah,
it's so big, it's going to knock you over. And we didn't have time for that. Like, you can't be knocked over. So
no.
sometimes it's like, thank God that I'm just in the moment doing all the things that need to be done, because there's a lot emotionally to take in. And I don't know how you could take that all in and keep doing all the things.
Well, that kind of leads to your podcast, which is really awesome. I don't know how you do it. What a great podcast and what a great title. Um, so why did you decide to start a podcast? Because you were
Well,
still working and it was after Dahlia's passing.
yes, I was working. And so I had actually written a book, and my book, Breathtaking, had been submitted at that point to the publisher. And in
Mhm.
traditional publishing, um, once you submit the book to the publisher, you then have this like huge wait, right?
Mhm.
Can take, 18 months or whatever it is before the book comes out.
Yeah.
So at that point, I knew I needed something to keep my mind off of this whole book thing. And I love to be really engaged in a creative project or three, at
Yeah.
any time. And I love talking to people. And so I just thought it would be something that I might enjoy. And lo and behold, I love it. And I wanted to call it I Don't Know How You Do It, because like you, and I'm sure many of your listeners, literally a day did not go by when somebody didn't say that to me.
Oh, I know.
And of
It's
course, I'm always like,
maddening.
what do you mean? What choice do I have? All the things
Right.
that you say. But I just loved this idea of how we look at other people's lives and think, I don't know how they do it. Why is that? And how do people do it? And so that was really the germ of the idea. And and the
Oh.
only through line for the show is that all of my guests have to, for whatever reason, find themselves often on the receiving end of people saying, I don't know how you do it.
So 5 minutes before I jumped on this podcast with you, my staff person, one of my favorite people on the planet, said to me, Annette, I don't know how you do it. How do you do these podcasts and all this work here? And, and I was like, yeah, I'm exhausted. But
Mhm.
but
Yeah,
it's some version of that has been said to me for almost 30 years now. And it is maddening.
it
But
is
of
maddening.
course, what are
Right.
you gonna do? Not do it? I
Right.
mean,
What choice do I have? It's not so bad. It's worse than you think. I mean, there's so many ways you could answer it, but really I was like, all right, let's dive in. How do people do it?
yes. Yeah. It's so great. It's a great show. You have to
You.
listen. And please rate and review. Give her a five
Yes.
star review. She
Thank
needs
you.
reviews. Everybody, we all need reviews, and rate and review this podcast too.
Yes.
So your book, Breathtaking, it came out in May. I haven't read it yet. I was telling Jessica before we hit the record button that it's hard for me because I still have a lot of PTSD. It's been almost 11 years since Elizabeth passed, but it was like yesterday still. There's so many moments when I'm right back there.
Mhm.
And so I do read these books. I love them, but I like to do them when I have space to really experience it and feel my feelings.
Yes.
And I have some time off coming up, so I'm gonna dive in. But I really want to talk about why we tell our stories. You know, why is it important? Why did I write my book? My memoir. Why did you write Breathtaking?
Yes. I started writing essays. In fact, I published my first essay when Dahlia was first diagnosed. So very early on, and it was about the diagnosis. And um, I, I mean, I had been a writer in a previous incarnation, so this was kind of my way of expressing myself. And I then, when we were in the PICU for those 3 months, started writing a lot. And I think it was just, first of all, being in the PICU is such a weird thing because at the one hand, it's like so intense, it's like you're in a war zone. And on the other hand, it's so boring, right? There's so much time. And so there was just, I mean, I was there for 3 months. And so I wrote some essays. And so then fast forward, Dahlia, when she came out of the hospital, was an eyes-on patient, meaning myself or my husband or a nurse trained specifically in her care had to be watching her 24/7. So that meant that when she napped or at night before the night nurse came, I'd be in her room and I would started writing, and it
Mhm.
just came to me that I'm going to write a book. And it wasn't like that outlandish because I had written a book in my 20s. I had a book come out on graduating college.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, I'd like the polar opposite kind of book, but in any event. And I have a lot, my father was a writer, there was a lot of writers. So like when my husband came in and I said, oh, I'm writing a book, it was not that weird a thing. Like if he had
Yeah.
come in and I had said, oh, I'm running a marathon or, whatever, he would have been like, what? But it was like, okay. So yeah, so I think that I wanted to write it, A, because it is my way of expressing myself.
Mhm.
B, because I wanted to bear witness to what was happening,
Yes. Yes.
and I wanted to have a little bit of control of the narrative. I mean, these lives we live, that's so out of our control, it can feel so overwhelming and chaotic. And I feel like when you write it down, you take a little bit of control of that narrative.
Mhm.
So that was important to me. And I wanted to share, what we were going through was at the same time unique. I mean, by definition, right? A rare disease and the things we were dealing with.
For
And also
sure.
there was so much universality in it, right?
Mhm.
The way we love our kids, the way we don't have control, the way our lives turn out different from what we ever imagined. I mean, so many themes are things that everybody experiences. And so I felt like it was important to share.
I love that. And I alternate my show between telling people's stories and doing, more like how to, good professional advice about XYZ, all things that we need. And the stories are just so universally loved by people because they're relatable. Even if it's not your life, it's still relatable. And I think for so many families with disabled kids or people with disabilities themselves, the lives we lead are really in the dark and in secret. And, people are just not aware of the challenges that we face, but also the beauty and the joy of it. Looking in from the outside, it's so scary and foreign, and people don't understand how, when I say things like Elizabeth was the love of my life, she was, there was a bond there that, and I love my other daughter, Caroline, and we have a great bond too, but this was just so indescribable, but something I wanted to write about too. But it's hard for people to see, but it's important that we don't live in the dark, that, we are not unseen. There's a great caregiver film called Unseen. I don't
Yes.
know if you've
Yes.
seen it. We need to be in our community and part of our community. And that is just so important. And so I love that you wrote this book. My book started out as a journal.
Mm.
And, as I was getting through, I got maybe like a third of the way through and I was like, wow, like, I think this could be a book, and I think this could really help somebody, which
Mhm.
was really my goal. Not just, telling our story, but to really let somebody else know that they weren't alone.
Yes, and I have had that feedback, and it's so gratifying when I do, when people say this, reading this made me feel less alone. And I love that. And also, you know what, selfishly, I wanted people to get to know the magic of Dahlia. And
Mhm.
that's another thing that's really gratifying when people say to me, I really feel like, I get a sense of who she was. And the thing is that this book was agented and sold before Dahlia died. This was never meant to be a book about Dahlia's death, and it isn't. It's very much
Right.
about her life. There was an epilogue I put in afterwards because it was all happening around the same time. But I do think that this idea of connecting and hearing other people's stories um, and being part of a community is just so important because it is isolating and we do live in the dark and it is unseen. And I love the thing Unseen too, because that name of that doc, because another thing that we felt was as Dahlia's disabilities became more visible, and by the end they were quite visible. I mean, look, you have a trach and you're attached to a ventilator. Let's start with that. But there was a whole host of things from top to bottom. And, we'd go out into the community and a lot of people, kids and adults, would noticeably look away.
Turn away. Yeah.
And of course it comes from, with the kids, the parents are saying, don't stare, or people don't want to gawk because, this in many ways is very different from what people are accustomed to. But I always thought, my God, imagine being that kid where when other people see you, they turn their head
Yeah.
and look away.
I've
I
spent
mean,
a
it's
lot
so
of time in
painful.
my life wondering what my Elizabeth felt and what she absorbed of what was going on around her. I have so many stories about that, and I don't probably don't have time for it on this podcast, but one particular story, which you had mentioned that you're doing a TED Talk next month. So I'm preparing a TED Talk too.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I haven't gotten booked for one yet, but I have a couple of possibilities. And so in my TED Talk, I was talking about this time when I was trying to get Elizabeth into the brownies in our town. And it turned out that they met once a month because these are little ones, and they met once a month at everybody's houses. Well, my Elizabeth was a wheelchair user and had a lot of equipment and stuff, and that just wasn't going to work. So I asked at the registration table if it would be possible for us to move it to a school or the library, someplace that was accessible. And I got a flat no, and actually a lot of outrage.
What?
Yes. And
Outrage? Why outrage?
because why do I want to change the brownies? This is what they do, and this is how they love it.
Wow.
And right? And people are going to naturally say, oh, that was a long time ago. That doesn't happen anymore. Yeah, but it does. The
Mhm.
next year after that, we were doing CCD. So for us, we're Catholic. I wanted Elizabeth to experience First Communion. She went to the classes all year. I had to teach them because I had to be there with her.
Mhm.
And at the end of communion, after the ceremony, they got all the kids together on the altar, sitting up on the steps of the altar. So Elizabeth couldn't join in. So as usual, we kind of shrunk to the side, but some mom that was there who I didn't know very well noticed and, spoke up and said, wait, we have to have Elizabeth in the picture, and made everybody come down. I just didn't have the energy to
Yeah,
fight that fight anymore. But I had often wondered, like, what was Elizabeth thinking when she was over here, left out of the
yeah,
picture? What was she thinking? How much of that did she absorb? She didn't really know about the brownies thing, but
right.
um, and then, in my TED talk, I say, well, wow, like amazing that mom stood up and spoke for us when we couldn't speak for ourselves. But I really want to say to everybody, but like, why didn't everybody speak up? Why was it
Because
only one
people are
person?
uncomfortable. This is my TED talk, right? But it is about the fact that it's awkward and uncomfortable. So what can we do? Because these things can bring us so much closer together. And
Right.
we're suffering from an epidemic of loneliness right now. I mean, like an actual official epidemic of loneliness. And my talk is specifically about grief, but these ideas of there are ways we can reach out to each other and connect in such meaningful ways if we just got a little bit more comfortable with our discomfort.
Wow. I can't wait. I want to do
Yay, okay.
that.
October 23rd.
So, another thing that we talked about, which I find so interesting, is the fact that people are asking you a lot about your book. How did you get your book published? What did
Yeah.
you do? Because I swear to you, for 5 years, actually almost six now, since my book came out, I probably once a month I get that DM from somebody. How'd you get your book published? And what did you do? So you're actually starting to do a little bit of book coaching. So
I
tell me,
am.
how did you
Well,
get your
first of all, I
book
think
published?
there's some statistic like 80% of people want to write a book or something. I mean, it's crazy. And then, a lot of people, will say, oh, I have this idea or that, but, going from idea to actually putting, I like to say pen to paper, though nobody does, very few people do that anymore, finger to keyboard.
Yeah.
And then, the whole process. And it's one thing to write the book, but getting it published and all that's involved with that, I think a lot of people find to be so mysterious. And so, since I've been through it, well, I've been through it twice, but been through it just so recently. And also, I worked in corporate for 26 years as a head of a creative team. So I'm very accustomed to helping to inspire, nurture, guide, lead people in their creative endeavors. So, so many people have been asking me questions. I thought, I love talking about this. I could talk about it all day. So let's
Mhm.
make it official. And so, yeah, I'm going to be starting to do some book coaching. So if anybody's interested.
Yes. Please get in touch with Jessica. We're going to have all of her contact information in the show notes so that you can get in touch with her, and the link to buy her book. Buy her book. Um, so breathtaking. Like, first of all, the cover is awesome. Did you design that?
I
I
didn't, and I'm so grateful because, the publisher obviously controls the cover and they hire the artist. And what happened was we had it was down to two concepts. And I'm just so in love with this cover and this concept. And I really actually didn't like the other one.
Mm.
And the publisher was very collaborative, but kept kind of trying to prepare me, at the end of the day, it's a business decision. And so they were doing focus groups with buyers and with the sales team and just with different people. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, oh my God. I mean, I really actually thought the other one was kind of yucky, and and so I'm doing my own little focus groups and saying, okay, but my people told me, And ultimately, this is where they landed, and I love it. It's got a big purple dahlia flower on it for listeners who are listening and aren't looking at it. And the word breathtaking is 2 words
Yeah.
in my title, which really was meaningful for a number of reasons. Number
Mhm.
one, obviously the disease took Dahlia's breath. Number two, so much of the story is about learning to actually be in the moment and not be out there trying to fix everything, especially something that's not fixable, and take those breaths. And number three, it's a lot about beauty. I mean, first of all, Dahlia was just such a breathtaking human being, but a lot about it, the book is learning to find meaning and create beauty and create joy in the midst of this tragic, scary situation. So breathtaking seemed to me to be just the perfect title.
Totally. And people are very surprised when we describe our lives as beautiful or our children as beautiful or, talk about the joy in our lives. And sometimes maybe feel like we are being, I think you said Pollyanna.
Pollyanna, and it's
Yeah.
not. I mean, it can sound that way, but that's not what it's about. It's not. It's about realizing that you can have the beauty and the joy right there with the grief and the sorrow, that they can live together, and that each is more powerful because of the other.
Yeah, I heard this monk talk about that, how
Oh,
your
really?
heart is
Maybe I should
big
become
enough.
a monk.
Yeah. But it was really eye-opening for me some years ago, just that your heart is big enough to hold sorrow and joy at the same
At the
time.
same time, that's probably my biggest lesson from what I've been through.
Amazing. I just love hanging out with you. I don't want this to end, but tell us a little bit about how did you get a publisher interested in your book?
Yeah. So, well, I will say first was getting an agent. And I wrote the whole book first. Now, with the memoir, that's typical, but if it's just a straight nonfiction book, then you don't have to write the whole thing first. You can sell it based on proposal. But I had written the whole book and I had a comprehensive 60-page proposal. So that had some sample chapters and I got an agent. That part of the process was pretty quick, but it was COVID. And, this didn't seem like a particularly uplifting story. Though I do think that people who read it say they felt uplifted and they
Mhm.
feel inspired. So I will put that out there. But in any event, it was not an overnight thing for the agent to sell it. But we found a publishing house that fell in love with it just as we had hoped. And that's what happened.
And how does that work with book contracts? Because people are going to write in and ask me about this, I
Oh my
swear.
goodness. And again, anybody can feel free to reach out, but with the book contract, so then you are under contract with the publisher.
Mhm.
And of course, when you have an agent, the agent gets a percentage of your earnings. And then with a book publisher, a traditional book publisher, typically you'll get some kind of advance. Is this what you wanted to know, like the nitty
Sure.
gritty?
Mhm.
And when you have a traditional publisher, they provide the editing and
The
the
artwork
artwork, the layout, all of it. And
and
then,
marketing, hopefully, marketing.
and I mean, I know so many people who have come out with books in the last few years, and I know people who have done big publishers, indie publishers, hybrid publishing, and self-publishing. And I will tell
Mhm.
you, every single person I know says that all the marketing is on them.
Yeah. Yeah. I did
So,
hybrid publishing.
okay.
Yeah.
So
So I
did you
had a
find
publishing
that the
house.
marketing was largely on you?
The marketing was definitely on me. The editing was very professional and the artwork was very professional. And they did, get me my number and, put it out there on all of the distributions, which is great. I definitely did not want to do that on my own. But the book belongs to me and all of my earnings, as minuscule as they are. People, you are not going to get rich writing books.
You are not
Trust
going to get
me.
rich writing books. That is so true. And I will say my book does not belong to me. Right. And it's
Yeah.
so weird because it's my story. I mean, it's different than writing a different kind of book, but it's a memoir. It's like, this is my story. I don't own it now. Right.
Yeah.
It's the publisher. and I get a percentage.
Yeah, people feel differently about these things. But
It
I
ha-
know everybody's going to ask about that. And please do reach out to Jessica. I'm so excited that you're doing this book coaching. It's so needed. There's
Thank you. I'm
not a lot of
excited too.
space for that. I know some people that are doing like, oh, here's my online course about how to get your book published. But if you're like me, you have a million questions, you want a checklist, and you want somebody to run things by,
Well, I
right?
love checklists, and I love helping to keep things on track. And I mean, there's
Yeah.
just so much. People get overwhelmed often by the proposal process, or, as we're talking about, by the marketing or like author branding, like that makes people uncomfortable. My
Yeah.
whole career was in marketing and creative. So I'm very comfortable with that. And I've sold 2 books based on proposals. So it's something I know how to do.
Jessica, you are my people. I have never met a checklist I have not loved.
Right? Do you put things you've already done on the checklist so you can cross them out?
I do.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I forgot to write that down. I went to the dry cleaner. Yep, I'm gonna write
I
down.
want credit for that by
I
myself on
do.
my, yes.
It makes me feel so good, like I'm getting stuff done because
Right.
it's an endless list. And you know what? It really grew out of having Elizabeth. She totally changed me in so many good ways because I could not have survived without all of the checklists that I had for her every day. Yeah, it was an amazing transformation. She really made me so much of a better person than I ever could have been. I had this really
Yeah.
surreal moment when she was in the hospital in the ICU at Boston Children's. And I looked out the window at one point and I saw my high school. I went to Boston Latin School and it was like, you could, because I was on a high floor, I was in 11. Um, you could see the school and I felt like that was a million years ago. And I thought about who was I then and who I was in that moment as that rare mom. It was like just a life-changing moment of, the journey that I had been on. And as you said, you have a lot of time to think when you're in the ICU.
That's right. But it's
I
true when
wish I
we
had
think
written my book back then. What a great idea that would have
right?
been.
And we think like, oh my God, if the me of then had seen this picture, what would
Yeah.
she have thought?
Jessica, I know we're running out of time, but I can't leave this podcast episode without asking you, what are your top 2 or 3 tips for parents who are taking this journey with, a disabled kid, a medically fragile kid? What would you like to leave people with?
Well, I will say, that we think we can't do it, right? And we think this is just beyond me and I could never. And you can.
Mm,
Whoever's listening to this, you can do it. And it's not just because, oh, what choice do I have? It's because this is your family, this is your kid, this is going to be
yeah.
scary and overwhelming. And it's also going to be glorious. And that's not Pollyanna. And it is going to change you, but it is going to change you in really profound, beautiful ways. And
Yes.
find your people. Find your people, find your people, find your people. It is so easy now with the internet.
I
And it
know.
doesn't have to be the same exact thing. Your kid doesn't have to have the same disability as my kid. Your kid doesn't have to have the same disease as my kid, but you're going through it and I'm going through it, and we can be there for each other.
Right. We
Right?
all have
And
so
then
much to give.
we
And I
have so
have to put a
much.
little plug in for Mito Action. What a
Yes.
great organization that
Yes.
we've both volunteered our time to. They do such a great job of connecting families and giving great essential information on health and legal and well-being and science and treatments. And they're just an amazing organization.
Amazing organization. And now we have Dahlia's Wish with Mito Action.
Yes.
So if anybody who's listening has a child who has a diagnosis of mitochondrial disease, check out Dahlia's Wish, because we are sending children and their families to Give Kids the World Village for the trip of a lifetime.
Which my daughter actually got to go to when she was
Same. Did you go through
four.
Make-A-Wish?
I went through Make-A-Wish, yes.
Same.
And it was a tough journey, but it was great to be able to go. And it's a great place.
such an amazing place. And I'll tell you, I think back to those memories all the time.
Yes,
I'm so
yes.
thrilled that we can do something with
We have a
sending.
big poster that we made up with all of the pictures. And yeah, we still have that hanging up. It's awesome. And I do sit on that committee that reviews those applications.
Mm.
So I love it. Okay. So thank you for those parent tips. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time and all the things that you're doing for our community. Yeah, you're a very amazing person. I'm
Oh my
so glad that
gosh.
we know
Well,
each other.
back at you, back at you. And yes, I'm so glad we know each other too. So thank you very much for having me.
All right. Okay, podcast fans, we'll be back soon with the next great story. Hang on.